You know, some book titles just hit you differently. They feel more like a warning than a story. And man, if there's one at the top of that list, it's gotta be Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. That name just conjures up this dark, chilling future. But have you ever stopped to think, what does that number actually mean? So that number, it's not random at all. Nope. It's a very, very specific temperature. In fact, it's the key that unlocks the entire world Bradbury imagined. It's this perfect blend of a cold, hard scientific fact and a really terrifying symbol. And there you have it. That's the auto-ignition point of paper. I mean, think about that. The whole premise of the novel is baked right into the title itself. We're talking about a world where knowledge literally goes up in smoke. It's simple, it's brutal, and it just sets the stage perfectly. Okay, but that leads to the big question, right? Who's holding the match? And this right here is the question that just flips the whole story on its head. Because in this future American society, the answer? Well, it's the last group of people you'd ever expect. All right, so let's dive into this world. Let's talk about the hook. So we step into the world of Guy Montag, our main guy. And this quote, this is the very first line of the book. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten. That's how we meet him. He's a fireman, and he finds joy, a special pleasure in pure destruction. For him, the smell of kerosene is basically perfume. He actually thinks he's a hero, keeping society safe by turning all these so-called dangerous books into harmless ash. And that's the central, absolutely horrifying twist of this whole thing. See, in this world, all the houses are fireproof. So what does a fireman do? Their job has been completely flipped upside down. Their job isn't to save anymore, it's to destroy. They're the official censors, the state-sponsored book burners. They're the ones who enforce this thoughtless society, rushing to burn down any house where they find illegal books. So you have to wonder, right? How does an entire society get to a point like this? I mean, how do you get a whole population to just stop thinking, to stop asking questions? Well, it turns out the system of control has a pretty sophisticated set of tools. Okay, so here's how it works. The goal is just constant, overwhelming stimulation, nonstop noise. You've got these massive wall-sized interactive TVs called parlor walls. You have these tiny little in-ear radios they call seashells that are just pumping sound into your head 24/7. Life is just this blur of mindless sports, pointless competitions, and advertising everywhere. And, if all that noise somehow isn't enough to numb you out, don't worry, there are always sleeping pills to make sure your mind stays quiet. And this is where it gets really chilling, almost prophetic. Remember, Bradbury wrote this back in 1953, and he describes these seashells, people walking around totally tuned out from the world around them with these little radios stuck in their ears. Sound familiar? I mean, it is an absolutely eerie prediction of our world of earbuds, Bluetooth, and constant connection. So what about this number? 9 or 10. What is that? Well, this is the number of emergency calls medical techs tell Montag they get every single night. And they're not going to a hospital, they bring this special machine that basically pumps your stomach. And it's always the same call, a sleeping pill overdose. It just pulls back the curtain on this quiet, desperate unhappiness that's simmering just below the surface of this supposedly perfect society. And here's the result of all that distraction. Real human connection? It's gone. It's been replaced by a fake one. Take Montag's wife, Mildred. She literally calls the characters on her giant TV walls her family. She's in these interactive shows where she reads lines from a script to them. And get this, she can't even remember when or where she met her own husband, but she knows all about her TV uncles and aunts. So, okay, you're probably thinking what I was thinking. There has to be some evil top-down government behind all this, right? Some big brother figure forcing this on everyone. That's the easy answer. But in this book, it's the wrong one. And the real reason is way more uncomfortable. This quote right here from Montag's boss, Fire Chief Beatty, is probably the most shocking and important insight in the entire book. He straight up tells Montag that the government didn't start this. There was no big declaration, no censorship order. The firemen, they aren't the cause of this world. They're just the consequence. The people chose this. And Beatty just lays it all out, step by step. He says it was a slow burn, no pun intended. First, people just stopped reading on their own. They wanted simpler, faster entertainment. Less controversy, more fun. Then every little group started getting offended by something. They'd demand pages get ripped out of books. So to avoid the hassle, everything just got watered down to what Beatty calls vanilla tapioca. Soon enough, TV and mass media filled that void, and eventually books just stopped selling. The firemen, they were just created to clean up the last of the mess. They basically became the janitors of public opinion. But here's the thing about societies like this. No matter how much you try to stamp it out, there are always cracks. There are always people who just don't fit in. The outliers, the others. And for Guy Montag, meeting these people is what changes absolutely everything. First up, he meets Clarice. She's his 17-year-old neighbor, and the system considers her antisocial. And why? Because she'd rather walk in the rain and actually talk to people instead of going to the fun parks. And she asks Montag this one simple but devastating question that just completely unravels his world. Are you happy? And for the very first time in his life, he realizes the answer is no. Then you've got Faber. He's this former English professor. His college shut down years ago because, well, nobody was signing up anymore. He's basically the ghost of the past, the voice of all the knowledge that's been burned. He's kind of cowardly at first, hiding away, but seeing Montag's growing desperation, it lights a fire under him, and he agrees to be Montag's guide, to help him try to bring the whole system down. And finally, that brings us back to Montag himself. He's the rebel, that little spark from Clarice's questions, combined with the horror of his wife's overdose, and then he witnesses a woman choose to be burned alive with her books rather than live without them. That's it. That's the breaking point, and his transformation is complete. He goes from a happy little book burner to a desperate fugitive, a man who is literally willing to kill and die for the right to simply think for himself. You know, the most powerful symbol in this book has got to be fire itself. And for Montag, its meaning does a complete 180. For most of his life, fire was just pure destruction. He called it a great python spitting its venomous kerosene. But then, when he escapes the city and he finds this group of rogue intellectuals hiding in the woods, he sees them gathered around a campfire. And it hits him. For the first time, he sees that fire isn't just for destroying things. It can also be for warming, for community, for life. Okay, so this brings us to the big question. Why does this book, written way back in 1953, still feel so incredibly raw and relevant today? Well, the thing is, Bradbury wasn't really writing about some distant, far-off future. He was writing about the world he saw taking shape all around him. You have to remember what was going on at the time. Bradbury was absolutely horrified by the Nazi book burnings in the 1930s. I mean, here's a guy who basically grew up in libraries. He saw it as a deeply personal attack. You combine that with the rise of television, the news about Soviet repression, and the fear and censorship of the McCarthy era right there in America, it was the perfect storm of inspiration for this story. And what's really fascinating is that decades later, Bradbury himself said the book had become even more relevant. He looked at the world and saw that minority pressure that Beatty talked about, where every single group demands that content caters to their specific feelings. He saw that as a new kind of thought control. Now, to be clear, he wasn't taking a political side here. His warning was against any group, left or right, that tries to shut down expression just to avoid offending someone. And this quote from Bradbury himself really says it all. I'm a preventer of futures, not a predictor of them. This is the absolute key. His goal was never to say, hey everyone, this is definitely what's going to happen. It was to hold up a mirror and say, look, this is what could happen if we're not careful. Fahrenheit 451 is a warning. It's a plea for us to value critical thinking, to value our individuality, and to value that beautiful, messy, and sometimes offensive complexity that you can really only find in books. So that leaves us with this final thought. In a world of endless scrolling, social media filter bubbles, and this constant pressure to think the same way as everyone else, the story of a fireman who secretly starts reading feels more urgent than it ever has. The book is really just asking us to look up from our screens for a minute, to engage with ideas that are difficult, and to decide for ourselves what's actually worth preserving. So the final question isn't really, will Bradbury's future come true? The real question is, what part are we playing right now in building it?